my name is Harry, this is my channel, Future Shock Digital. Right now I am in Switzerland, long story, but here I am. And I'm going to tell you things I love about the G95. So, let's do it, let's roll. So the time-lapse feature, I really like it. I really like having the dedicated dial to set the time-lapse mode up. So in time-lapse, the camera will spit out a 4K video file, which is fantastic. But that file looks like can only be used for preview purposes. This is because when the camera takes a shot and it opens and closes the aperture, which is normally something you would see in a DSLR. Not really a mirrorless system, but it does in this situation. So it's kind of frustrating because each frame is going to be a slightly different exposure because the camera doesn't travel back to that exact point on the aperture. Now you can do two steps from here. You can use a manual lens, or you could do the lens twisting method, which is something you do on an SLR where you set the exposure and twist off the lens. But the problem with that, it seemed that because there are just so many lens contacts on the Micro Four Thirds system that I couldn't do that twisting method. So that's a major issue. So I had to de-flicker the time-lapse video files and also the time-lapses. I had to de-flicker it using Vinci Resolve Studio, which worked perfectly. It's definitely something I would recommend for flickering. But yeah, just keep that in mind. The video file that is spat out also is in a square format, so you would still need to actually do a bit of editing in order to get it looking good. Something also to keep in mind is that the file that is produced, if you're shooting in a smaller resolution JPEG, which is, maybe something that you want to do, it's something that I did in this situation in the Hong Kong airport because I wanted, it's easier to manage. But when you do that, you actually you get a 720p video file, which is a bit of a rude surprise. So the G95 does not have a record limit. Now, one of the reasons why I got this camera, because oftentimes I get asked by people to record events and I just can't do it with the Sony 6500. So with long videos, if you don't want the video to be cut up into pieces at 3.9 gigs video files, you need to have the right memory card and a memory card that's not FAT32, otherwise it will break up the file for you, but it's seamless. So let me just pause myself there for 1 second. It looks like there is quite some noise in 4K when you shoot even at 100 ISO. So first, in order to shoot at 100 ISO in the first place, you have to activate the higher ISO settings, or in this case the lower ISO settings, because the camera begins off at ISO 200. According to DxOMark's scores, there's no difference in noise performance at ISO 100 versus ISO 200. Therefore, I don't know why they don't just give you the ability to shoot at ISO 100. Please tell me the reason in the comments. But the camera itself, it seems that when you shoot in 4K, well, you definitely get a crop, but because it's not using the full sensor, therefore it tends to be a little bit noisier as there is less light coming through. So that could be a big point of difference between this camera and say the GH5. If you're looking for high-end 4K, you should look at something else. The camera market has gone from big cameras to small cameras. This itself is just a return to a more comfortable form factor rather than a very minuscule form factor. But you do get a lot of benefits with that. Firstly, it's weather sealed. Secondly, heat management is a big thing, especially if you are doing long video recording. You don't have to worry about the camera overheating. The camera battery is large, so it's larger than a very small camera, so you do get good battery life. You have a microphone input, which is very important. Adds a whole nother dimension. You have white balance button, ISO, and focus mode. So all these things just makes life a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. The camera is weather sealed, and it just feels good in the hands. But it is fairly large. It is larger than many ASPC size cameras. In-body image stabilization. The in-body image stabilization on this camera is fantastic. Pair that with the stabilization on just the kit lens, and it's just phenomenal. This is the best stabilization I've ever seen. As you can see in these shots here, we have without stabilization, with stabilization, with an additional electronic stabilization. This is using the kit lens 12 to 60, and the image stabilization lock feature, which will lock onto an object, which really does the trick. The autofocus. I find the autofocus strobes a bit. It's a bit stroby, like flashy. Right now, I don't think you'll be able to notice much of an issue because right now I'm shooting f11. But if you were to open up the aperture, I think you would notice that issue. So let me try and find some examples for you in post. So this camera right now, I'm using the flippy screen, which is fantastic. I really like it for pieces of cameras like this. But here's the thing about a flippy screen. For photography, for when I try to get the shot of something else, it's a little bit cumbersome to take out the flippy screen. I prefer the flip out screen. Now, the people who are most vocal about the flippy screen happen to be YouTubers. So if you're watching video reviews on a camera and you want a particular camera, know that those YouTubers want the flippy screens for themselves. It might not work out for other people. So right now I'm filming in Vlog to get a better exposure on the clouds. But what I want to talk about is the slow-mo. The slow-mo, it forces you to film in manual focus and auto exposure. Why not auto exposure and autofocus, or manual focus and manual exposure? I don't know, but just that combination can be a little bit frustrating. Doesn't give you full creative control, yet at the same time it forces you just to focus a little bit harder. Now this could be because they don't want you to set a shutter speed that's too slow. So if you're shooting 100 frames a second, they don't want you to shoot at 50, your shutter speed at 50, 1/50th. But the problem is that sometimes you might want to adjust the exposure yourself, or you don't want an exposure change at that time. You can set you can lock the exposure, but just something to keep in mind. In slow-mo, you don't get manual exposure. The slow-mo also requires a bit more light because it's slow-mo. As far as the shutter speed, and the problem with that is that the Micro Four Thirds sensor might not be providing you with enough light in the first place in many situations. So slow-mo on this camera, I'm going to give a 7 out of 10. So the app works very well, and it will transfer video files as well. Whereas I found with Sony cameras, it transfers the photo, but it won't let you transfer the video via the app. So there you go. So in conclusion, I think the G95 or G90 or G91, whatever, I think it's a fantastic B cam. I really feel that it does the trick. It's sturdy, it's strong, and there's no record limit. So that's pretty much it. Hope this video has been interesting to you. Leave a like, leave a comment, leave a subscribe. You know what? You do you. Do whatever you need to do. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.